Welcome, everyone. Welcome to We Earth Radio. I am so excited to have my friend and one of my inspirations in life, Mark Nepo. He is a #1 New York Times bestselling author who's moved and inspired readers and seekers all over the world. His numerous books include The Book of Awakening, The One Life We've Given, and Drinking from the River of Light have been translated into more than 20 languages. Mark has appeared several times with Oprah Winfrey and on her Super Soul Sunday program. And in 2015, he was given a Life Achievement Award by Age Nation. And in 2016, he was named by Watkins Mind, Body, Spirit magazine as one of the 100 most spiritually influential living people. Mark, 23 books. I don't know how you do it.
Oh, I think everyone has a gift if we can somehow figure out what it is and let it be our teacher, then the rest is kind of easy. It's like a fish finding the current. So my ability to listen and I like to say retrieve books, um, uh, it's the one thing I think I know I was born to do.
Yeah. Well, the book we were going to talk about today is Surviving Storms, Finding the Strength to Meet Adversity. We certainly have our share of adversity and storms going on. Don't know where to start with it all, but you often talk in your books about heart work.
Yeah.
And maybe we could start by talking about what does it mean to be doing heart work?
Well, so as I start to express that, let me kind of give a where that all really came alive in me, and I'll be 72 next month in a few weeks, which I'm sure you feel. And when I ran into someone our age when I was young, I thought they were ancient. It
I know
doesn't.
I just turned 77.
Oh, okay. Well, you look fantastic. I wouldn't, it doesn't seem so old now. But as you know, in my early 30s, I almost died from a rare form of lymphoma. And while I was always, I would say, heart-centered, before my cancer journey, I was way up in my head, way up in my head. And through no wisdom on my part, but just by being turned inside out and upside down, on the other side, still blessed to be here, everything went down into my heart, and ever since then, my mind, the great tool that it is, all for all of us, uh, my mind serves my heart and not the other way around. And so as we talk about heart work, I'm also reminded this is an archetypal journey that great love and great suffering ground us in our heart. The Lakota have a great saying that the longest journey you will make in your life is from your head to your heart.
Mhm.
And so I think from that I started to learn bit by bit on my own journey. And as you know, what I offer are examples, not instructions, just for us to all compare notes. And I think one of my greatest lessons has been that the heart is the most reliable and strongest muscle and teacher that we have. And and so as I've come to learn heart work in very real ways, what does that mean? Well, it means, and I invite everyone who's listening to personalize this if it speaks to you. Um, but it means leaning in, always leaning back in, especially when the difficulties of life push us away. Lean back in. It means opening after closing. It means getting up one more time than falling down. It means listening more than speaking. It means, one of the a line and the things that I write about when they come to me, they become if I, my teacher, and then I work with them. And a line that's come to me recently is that to get through, to harden uh, will help us get through life, but to soften will let us live life.
Hmm.
And heart work is moving from hardening to softening.
Hmm.
Now, in the Tao, there's a verse that Lao Tzu has where he says, everything brittle breaks, be like water. be like water. So as we start to talk about it, that's a great way to, some of these things about how we, uh, what do those gestures look like and practices look like? Well, everybody's got to personalize that. What does it look like for you and me to soften and not harden, to open and not close, to lean in and not lean away?
Yeah. I can so relate to you're saying where you started was kind of in your head. And I remember just, I've been a teacher all my life now. I work with trauma patients and do trauma work. But when I would give a talk or when I would teach, it would always be lots of notes and like that. And now I noticed when I do a talk, I actually don't want any notes because there's this sense of feeling emergent. There's like as opposed to what I've learned from a book or I know. But when you get into that emergent, maybe it's leaning towards what you're calling true self, that sense of what's happening right now is the most important thing. And whatever it is I want to talk about with you is wanting to be expressed now. It's not something that I've learned
Yes.
or remembered.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that early on that came to me was very helpful was realizing that in teaching and in speaking and in, that it's about presence and not performance. And we live in a world that's highly geared toward performance, but the things that help us grow, the things that deepen us and expand us all come from presence, which is totally emergent. Totally. I mean, and the paradox, I love the image because I would say that, at this time of my life, writing and teaching is kind of like spiritual jazz. And it feels, and so that metaphor really is powerful for me, that because take a jazz pianist, and I think an example comes to mind of Ellis Marsalis's father. I can't remember his first name now. Um, but I think he's gone now. But he was I saw him in New Orleans, just in a little club practicing. What, a master.
Winton.
Not Winton. Oh, I think it is Ellis. Ellis Marsalis is the father. Yes,
Oh,
excuse me.
of Winton Marcel. Okay.
Of Winton
Yeah.
Marsalis. Yes, yes. So, but my God, and you know that any musician like that, any jazz musician, they first spend a lot of time, even years, in discipline, in learning their instrument, in this case the keyboard, so well that they can ignore it.
Mhm.
So well that there's no distance between the music they hear and the music they play. And it feels to me like, I remember being young and like anyone, any young poet. And I think this is true of any artist. I remember I would see something clearly and I would try to say it. And then I'd look at it and they go, that's not it. I can see it. Why can't I say it? And I try again and again and again. And I try 6, 7 times. I'd be frustrated as a young man. Why can't I can see it. Why can't I put it down on paper? And I think and certainly I've learned my craft over all these decades. But the central difference is everything that matters is unsay. The only things worth writing about are those things that are unsayable,
Mm.
that are ineffable. So now I see something and I try to say it, and I might get closer, but I still don't get there. And now I try again and again and again. And now, instead of being frustrated, I bow to the mystery and say, thank you. You just gifted me with 7 poems.
It's beautiful. When I work with people with trauma or trauma responses, and if I'm not in my body or in my emotions, I can't work with them. If I go to what I learned as a therapist, it's useless because they're mostly not in their body and not in touch with their emotions, or they're run away, they're not, they have no sense of how to regulate them. So the only instrument I have is my body. And now that I'm writing this book I mentioned, I'm recognizing that I have to be in my body and my emotions to write, for
Absolutely.
decent writing to come out too.
I think one of that's where, the Book of Awakening, and which most people know, and it has touched so many people. I've been very blessed by that. But it's really a tribute to what you're saying, is that that's where I apprenticed or learned. Like my I learned I didn't write unless I was in my heart.
Hmm.
And the writing of that book, which is a day book, so it seems small when you say, "Oh, there's an entry for a day," but there's 365 of them. So very quickly you go, "What have I gotten myself into?" Um, but the way it would work when I was writing that book over 20 years ago was I would get into that field, and they'd come in batches, two, three, four, and I had to pay attention, because then there would be the momentum would be, well, gee, maybe one more today.
Hmm.
And I had to pay attention. No, no, it's coming up from my heart into my head. Stop.
Hmm.
Come back tomorrow, the next day, whenever. And so it was a real practice in which has informed all my books. That is something I only write um, when I'm in my heart. And so when people, I've had people very kindly say, "Oh boy, like that entry on that day, that was written just for me." Well, that's so kind. I'm not that smart. But what it's a tribute to is not me. It's a tribute that when each of us are in our heart, it's as if our the inhabiting our authenticity is the doorway to the common pool of humanity. And so if they feel that, it's because I was in my heart, and therefore, when they went in their heart, we met there. It really had nothing to do with my writing per se. And I think this is a kind of a spiritual law. And in fact, the Christian desert mystic fathers had an amazing metaphor that spoke to this. And they used the metaphor of a wagon wheel. We've all seen them on westerns. Little there's a hub, and then there's spokes, and there's a rim. Well, they said every soul on earth is a spoke in the wheel. And if you go out to the rim, no two spokes occupy the same place. And each one is necessary to hold the rim, which is community. So when we go out into the world in our becoming, we find our uniqueness. But you take those same spokes, they said, and you go inward, and they all meet in the middle.
Hmm.
So when we go inward, we find our commonness, our common spirit, and the hub is God. And what's beautiful about this metaphor after all these centuries is, you take any one of those out and you don't have a wheel.
Mhm.
A hub, a spoke, the rim, it doesn't work.
Yeah, the thread that connects us all.
Yes.
You know, when I started this show almost 20 years ago now, it was to heal the wounds that alienate, separate, and marginalize us. And that's always been at the heart of the work. And when we look right now, there's the level of separation, of alienation, of blame, of uh, divisiveness is just, I've never experienced anything like it in my life. Maybe it's been there and I just wasn't aware of it. But where do we start when we're so we're all traumatized by the things that are going on, to find our connection, our kindness, our connection, that thread, that spoke that goes
Yeah.
back to the center.
Well, I think, and so actually the first part of the book, the new book, I took it was my chance to take my guess at how did we wind up here in our age in such an estranged, separated state. And some of the things I found speak to what you're asking about. And so let me start by saying that There is almost, and every age has different particular challenges, but every age it's our turn. Are we going to reconnect or stay disconnected? Are we going to choose love over fear? Are we going to choose that we're more together than alone, than self-interest? you know and so as we look at the particulars, for our generation, and some of these fault lines go back hundreds of years, and one uh, is the industrial revolution. We go back to the industrial revolution in Europe in the 1800s, and so a couple of things happened there uh, that were the seeds of what such acutely separates us today. So up until that time, and it's not to say we shouldn't have progress. It's to say, how do we compensate for the liabilities of progress? So up until then, most the way that most people made a living and survived was through agriculture or bartering. And so people lived where they worked. Even if you were a cobbler and you made shoes, you lived in the back and you sold the shoes in the front. So relationship was family and work was all one. And by the nature of it, if you were a farmer, from seed to harvest, if you were a cobbler and you made a shoe, it was from cutting the leather hide to stitching it and sewing the laces finally and hammering a heel on it. You experienced some form of wholeness from beginning to end. These things, it's invaluable what they do for the soul. Well, the Industrial Revolution came along, and now there are factories. And now, for the first time, people are leaving home to work. So the net of relationships is broken. In fact, they start spending more time at work than home. And when they're at work, because the factory, to the god of efficiency, said, no, no, you don't make the whole shoe. You're just going to make heels. We got somebody else making the shoelaces. You don't worry about it. Well, that might be fine for efficiency, but we suffer if we don't experience wholeness. So
Mm.
now, to add to this, when we look at Karl Marx in 1844, wrote about this, and he was there at the advent of this. And let me just pause to say, Karl Marx often gets a bad rap because
Yeah.
Marx didn't create Marxism, dictators did. He was a very insightful theorist, sociologist, and one of his remarkable insights is he foresaw, looking at the Industrial Revolution, he said, wow, if this goes on, if there's enough people divorced, separated from their basic human nature, we will have an alien nation. And he coined the term alienation. And he foresaw the first generation of therapists as alienists, he called them, seeing that their job was to repair people to their basic human nature. Well, boy, don't we need that today?
Mm.
My God. And I think one of the things that, to go all that way of saying, how do we begin? I think we have to restore individually our direct connection with life. Because when we have, and we go back to our heart work, when we're not in our head, when we break the isolation, when we're tender and vulnerable and realize, my God, this has all never happened before. This is all real. Once we can reconnect with our direct connection with life, we rediscover a reverence for life. And if
Mm.
we have reverence for life, we can't do harm. So now, you look at the insurrection on that, now infamous January 6th. And I remember, I don't know, I happened, like many people, to see it live on TV. And forget the politics of either side. What I was so devastated by was I was witnessing barbaric violence while people were dissociated.
Mhm.
They were taking pictures of themselves. Now, as if they couldn't tell if this was a video game or real. They had lost their reverence for life. They had lost their connection from life. So I think even with kids, we need to affirm their ability to know life, to feel life, to trust in what they know. And this also connects with the dissolution of reality in our age. There are facts and things are real. If I put my hand in water, I don't need you to tell me it's wet.
Yeah.
And likewise, as you know so well, if I'm traumatized, I don't need anyone to tell me what pain is, what loss is, or joy, or love. Now if we say, well, what caused those things? What is their value? What's their impact? Well, then we can discuss that. There can be different views. But wet is wet, love is love, pain is pain. And so people have backed into this through their isolation, into this, and in a way, this inability now to discern reality. Well, this goes all the way back to Hamlet.
Hmm. Yeah.
That was one of the brilliant things that, for all Shakespeare's language, we take it for granted because but he was such an amazing, his imagination of sheer plot. I mean, when you think about Hamlet, we know it so well, we just take it for granted, oh ho hum. But here was a guy who was incredibly precocious, sensitive, gifted, and he comes home one day to find out that his uncle slept with his mother and they both killed his father. His whole world is upside down. And he knows in his heart what's true and that he needs to act, he needs to do something in himself and about this. But he so unravels his own certainty again and again and again that he unravels the very ground of existence that he stands on. And it's a deep cautionary tale that again is very relevant today, you know. So, and there he is, amazingly adrift, and he stumbles upon the grave diggers, and they happen to be digging a grave, and they unearth unknowingly the skull of the jester who made him laugh as a boy. And that's when he jumps in the grave, holds the skull, and says, "Man, I don't even know what's real anymore, to be or not to be. Am I even here? Is this any different than people who are in their rooms saying, I don't know what's real? QAnon, elections, so we have, when uh, the papers, the classified documents were seized at Mar-a-Lago, and then you have within 48 hours some misguided person goes to an FBI agency in Cincinnati with a gun, is so divorced from reality, he gives his life for it, to be or not to be. Wow.
Yeah, the word integrity comes up for me as you're speaking, the sense of wholeness, that interpretation of integrity. And I work with so many people that are so dissociated, and when you don't know you're broken, how do you find the path to repair? My
Yeah.
particular answer to that is go to the body, go to the emotions, and bring awareness. And it's awareness that allows the healing to take place. But I'm curious about your thoughts about, when we're broken, how do we find the path to repair?
Well, I think this is where, uh, and that old saying, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." I don't. We have to hold all of this with compassion because any one of us we could be, someone we're talking about hypothetically. We could easily, in a blink, be them, and they could be sitting here talking about us. But I think that we're all challenged, and this is the gift, the power of telling the truth of our experience, no matter how painful, no matter how confused, because there's a healing power in expression. My book, Drinking from the River of Light, is about all of that. And that there's just this incredible power, to admit what is true shows us a path, not the path. It shows us a path, which we step by step then can, have it. Often, and I think this is the other thing about the heart is always ahead of us. It seems like our heart knows, and then we spend a lot of time catching up. So, I resist. I don't want to be sad. I don't, because I don't want to admit that I already am. I don't want things to change. And so I try to control things because I don't want to admit they've already changed. And this has been at play in the pandemic. The old world is gone. It's gone. No, no, it's in denial. No, who do we blame? It's these goddamn masks. That's what it is. No, no.
Right.
Life is changing. So, it's this incredible thing. And I think when you look at this, the power of admitting the truth, it shows us the next steps. That old thing about when you go across stepping stones across a stream, until you're on one, you can't see the next. And telling the truth of our experience makes the next step visible. And I think, one of the great examples of this is Beethoven. And I absolutely feel Beethoven is heroic because to me, he was an ordinary man carrying an extraordinary gift. So imagine Beethoven, as we know, one of the great composers of all time. He's he is born with the gift to bring music into the world that no one has ever heard before. And Beethoven, by the age of 28, went completely deaf. So your gift is to bring unheard music to the earth, and you're never going to be able to hear it played. Oh my God. What a trauma. And it was very difficult for him. And he lived in Vienna, and in 1802 he needed to get away, and he went to a nearby town, Heiligenstadt, and for ostensibly retreat. But the truth is, this was so unbearable for him. He was contemplating suicide. And so he went there and he started to write a suicide note. And he just, rawly told the truth of how hard this was. I can't do it. It's just unbearable. And the power of telling the truth, by the end of what started as a suicide note, somehow he ends up writing the last lines. This is known as the Heiligenstadt Testament in the music world. He winds up at the end saying, well, I guess I'll go back to Vienna and I'll make the most music with what I can for as long as I can. And he puts the letter in his pocket. He goes back to Vienna, puts it in the back of his top desk drawer, never to be found till after his death by his brother. And the next decade is considered a decade of masterpieces.
Right. Yeah. You know, I know what you're saying, but I'm also sometimes listening to the listening of our listeners, and there's so much, to go back what you said earlier about the truth. There's questioning what is the truth, but it's not the story that you have to say either. The truth is about the experience. What are the emotions? What are the feelings? What are the sensations? What so is the truth, not the story that I'm this way because this happened and that happened. And I find, in my work, I have to allow the story, but get beyond the stories to get to the truth of what's the felt sense, what's the emotion, what is it that we're holding down, that energy that we're suppressing that wants to move through us, that creative, innovative response to life.
Oh, I agree. I agree that we have to know our stories so we can move through them,
Mhm.
not so that we can stay inside them.
Right. Or use it to justify our life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, and in that way, I think, Angie Arian, who was a great
Mm.
teacher, um, And Angie had this wonderful insight of saying, experience of life is not being a victim, it's an initiation. It's an
One of
initiation.
the things, I'm sorry, I was going to say, one of the things in your book that I think is so simple and so powerful is, how do we learn to find the extraordinary in the ordinary? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that one of the liability, every culture has like a person has a gift and a shadow. And especially in the West, I mean, not just America, but Western civilization from the Greeks on through Europe and to here, we've always had this exceptionalism, this specialness. We need to be special or look for what's special or find what's extraordinary. And that precludes us from finding heaven on earth because great love and great suffering, at least in my life, cracked me open to discover. I mean, if there was anything about the miracle of my still being alive back all those years ago, it was that I was scoured and given the lens of the miraculous to discover, everything is extraordinary in the ordinary if I just bring my full attention and heart to it. And so when I'm confused or troubled, and none of this exempts us from the human moods of fear, confusion, worry. But when I am in those states, I try to give my full heart's attention, and this is another form of heart work, to whatever piece of life is before me. It could be a bird, it could be a fly on a window, it could be a leaf blowing in my driveway. I give my full attention until the piece of life before me becomes my teacher.
Hmm.
Becomes my teacher. And I think that, this is the thing. And, as a young artist, all the art forms we're mistaught. Do something that's never been done before. Look beyond the look for good material. And then, I almost died and I realized, that's all wrong headed. Everything is good material if my heart is open to it. So again, it's not about achieving something special. It's about being present enough until the specialness, the common specialness in everything shows itself. When about 10 years out from the heat of my cancer journey, it was I think it was like the 10th year anniversary. And I was living in Albany, New York, and I wanted it to be a special day, and I went to my little coffee shop. I wanted to have a little time to scribble in the corner, and then I was going to go for a walk in the park that I loved in Albany, and of course none of this played out. So I went to the coffee shop, way too busy. It was annoying. People were interrupting, so I left. And then I was going to drive to this park in town that I wanted to. And then as I'm driving, it starts raining. And then this is before cell phones, and my car broke down. So I'm going on my special day, right? And then I get out of the car because I had to walk to a gas station. I didn't have a cell phone. So I'm walking in the rain, and all of a sudden, I said, you know what? It's perfect. Water is falling from the sky on my face. How does that happen? And ever since then, I believe the only bad weather is no weather.
Yeah, that's great. I just thinking of many moments like that where car breakdowns and things, and all of a sudden something miraculous happens. It's, and if you're looking for the miraculous, you will find the miraculous too. One of the things you talk about in your book too is the movie that I love. Tristan Harris was one of the main people that put it together, The Social Dilemma. And this manipulation through the media and the number of thousands of data points that they have on each of us, and how they direct the right news that we want to hear in the right direction. that makes it very hard to open ourselves to the miracle of life when we're being bombarded with fear and we say, well, we want to choose love over fear, but we're being manipulated at such a deep psychological level. That talk about how you
Oh, the
find a
first
way
thing,
to.
yeah. So there's a couple of things about, and I do love, that for people who haven't, I know you do too. Encourage people to see that documentary, which is remarkably about some of the leading innovators who created platforms like Google and Facebook and all these things. And then they realized later on, like Frankenstein, they had created a monster. And they left and created this documentary to try to speak to it. So there's a couple of things about it. And first, let's just say that technology at, at its base level is just an instrument. It's a fancy screwdriver. It's not a worldview. It's not a philosophy. However, it can be manipulated. And if we don't have a center, we don't have to have things figured out, but if we aren't committed to living life and having an inner journey, like water filling a hole, the characteristics of technology will become our default value. So now, one of the great menacing assumptions that technology purports and supports is that life is happening where you're not. It's over there. Fear of missing out. Oh, if I could just get over there. Oh, I'm late. I'm deficient. I lack. And the great truth that all the traditions affirm is life is here. There is no there, there's only here. So, how do we recover here? And so now you take the space, and then we'll get to the manipulation. But now you take this, there's two other things about technology in the modern world. One is we think that when we hold a cell phone or an iPad or we're on a computer, that we're alone. But the truth is, we are neither in relationship nor in solitude. We're in a digital netherworld, and that drains our soul because we don't have connection with either the inner world or the outer world. It's a digital form of purgatory. And it reminds me that Rilke, the great Rilke, had a line in one of his poems. He said, I am alone, but not alone enough to make every moment holy. Yeah, yeah. So the third kind of leg of this kind of toxic triangle with technology is the fact that spiritual physics tells us that everything is always coming together and breaking apart at the same time. Always. But in our modern world, because of technology, we are addicted to the noise of things falling apart. So right? When we were
Yeah.
young, there were just three TV stations, and there was the weather report. Now it's called Storm Watch.
Right,
Well,
right,
last
right.
time I knew, storm was only one kind of weather. So we have emphasized, and the fear has been instilled. Our relationship with the unknown has been thwarted. Certainly, bad things, catastrophic things can happen from the unknown, but so does beauty and wonder and grace and miracle and joy. After all, has there, I don't know one person I have been blessed to love or been loved by that I ever planned to meet. It doesn't work that way. So, the unknown, we have to reestablish not only our direct connection to life, but we have to become intimate with the unknown again. So, you take this, and this is an example, about which requires an inner practice and in regards to technology. And that is, you know, this 24/7 bombardment of news. So, I go back to when the Twin Towers came down, and I actually was on my way home from Montreal, and my wife and I saw that live on TV, and then of course we saw it as all of us did, 100 times, 200 times, 300 times, those planes going. Well, it's a wonderful thing if it's shown 100 times so that 100 different people can see it. But you and I don't need to see it 100 times. And therefore, we have to stay heart centered and say, I got it. I felt it. Now I need to internalize it and not watch it anymore. And that's a practice. Just as we have to lean into life, we have to turn away from the bombardment of media. You know, when it's fascinating, before all this, when Lincoln wrote, gave his second inaugural address, he hand wrote it, and then there were scribes who made handwritten copies, and the way they disseminated it across the United States was by Pony Express.
Wow.
It took 3 weeks to get from Washington, D.C. to Sacramento. So it's wonderful that we can instantaneously see things, but you can see that built into the ancient and timeless law that things that matter take time. There was built-in reflection time. By the say you didn't, you're irate over Lincoln's, inaugural. Well, by the time you got it, it happened 3 weeks ago. And by the time you could respond, it might be another week or two. So there was built-in reflection time, and we don't have that. And so we have people acting impulsively and anonymously. And the worst, not the better angels, the darker angels populate the internet because of that. So how do we reclaim our heart center? How do we listen? How do we reflect? How do we start by expressing the truth of our own experience?
I think one aspect, just this whole thing of uncertainty and cultivating uncertainty, because the knee-jerk response to uncertainty is control.
Yes.
And that's what keeps us stuck in not evolving, not expanding in that way of the deep presence that allows for innovation, creativity, self-expression to come out. It's that fear of the unknown and uncertainty that has us constantly trying to control my environment and missing life.
Yeah, and that fear that's given rise to control is historically um, a real crack in our human journey on Earth. And you go back to Taoism, and I love the sense of the Tao. It's so deep and so simple uh, and profound. And the notion of Taoism, for those who aren't familiar, is and the word Tao itself, it's undefinable. It means the way. That's all. They don't even try to name it, but it represents, at least to me as a poet, the invisible river of life. And therefore, we are all fish in that invisible river. The fish don't control the river. It's impossible. So the purpose of will is to find the current and align with it. And
Beautiful.
all the spiritual traditions, especially Native American traditions, speak about the deeper journey of aligning our small lives with the big life. And in our fear, not to feed our control, but to endure the impulse to control and put it down and put it down. This is this sense of control. We can see it. This is a great example of the two very different impulses that live in each of us. So, Columbus, when he landed on the North American continent, a continent that had civilizations that were thousands of years old, and he had the audacity to step foot on North America and say, "This is mine." And you counter that with the other impulse, which we could use Carl Jung as an example, who stepped foot on the continent of the unconscious. And his first impulse was to say, "I think I belong to this." And now both of those impulses live in us. It's like the old, Native American story about the two wolves. Which one will I feed?
Yeah. The something you said just brought up for me this: what we promote in our culture is competition, individualism, and self-interest over what you talk about a lot in the book: authenticity, caring, and kindness. That whole um, feeling of interbeing that Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing. And so when we're looking at kind of getting in the current and out of swimming upstream, of being a rugged individual or a romantic individual or a special person, which we talked about earlier. Talk about how to enter that current and that
Well,
moving towards the kindness.
I think for all of us, it starts, and this is why our connection through our wonder and heartache to to establish a conversation with life that doesn't end, so that we can be affirm that who we are is enough. We are complete as we are. We are worthy as we are. We don't have to grab something special because somebody else is reaching for it. We don't have to put someone down, play seesaw so that we can put ourselves up. All of this comes from lack. All of this comes from a sense of lack. And so, how do we have the courage to say, whoever we are, whatever we are with our limitations and everything, that it's humbly, it's enough. It's more than enough. And I think this is one of the hard gifts of the pandemic was, you know, the word Sabbath in the Jewish tradition literally means the one day we don't turn one thing into another. And we were forced into a global Sabbath. We couldn't race, we couldn't compare, we couldn't run, we had to be alone, we had to stop, we had to be with the miracle of what is. Flawed as it is, difficult as it might be, and build from there. And and so I think the world, and this has been I think kind of a constant misperception throughout history. While there are many things that need to be repaired in every generation, it is not our job to improve the world, but to inhabit it. If we inhabit it, we'll repair it.
Yeah.
If we try to improve it, first off, there's the assumption that I know what it needs to be improved, which is audacious. And true repair comes just out of caring, out of care.
My guest last month, or a couple of weeks ago, was Dan Siegel. Has a new book called Intra Being, and I was fascinated by the move from interbeing, uh, which is with intra, within being, and that concept. And when you talk about lack, we're swimming in a sea of individual, familial, cultural, and ancestral trauma. And the three main outcomes of that are: one is the belief of separation. Two is a sense of scarcity or lack. It's interesting. I have Lynn Twist on next week, who always says what you appreciate appreciates, right? And the third one is a break in time space, um, which basically is saying I'm taking my past and filing it in my future and continuing to live into that past. And so, when we're looking at, okay, so how can I see myself in others? You've many times in many of your books, I'm recalling the one with the spoons, the long spoon and the difference between heaven and hell. But these ways of beginning to recognize that you are more over here, Mark, than on the East Coast. You're in my nervous system. I have more access to you by seeing what's in my nervous system, and the circumference of my ability to know you is directly related to how much you can be in my nervous system, and I can allow that, right?
Yeah.
So how do you see this shift? I feel it is the spiritual movement of our time to move into this intra being, to recognize the sense of not separate but very much involved, even to the effect that we show up in each other and we can only know each other based on
Well,
our
this is
ability to open it.
for me, let me try to speak about it this way, that um, the authenticity, the courage to be authentic within and between us
Mhm, mhm,
is the great, has always been the great teacher that allows us, the two kind of main, like spiritual elements, if you will. I think three, that are corollaries to earth, water, fire, air, and they are presence, meaning, and relationship.
mhm,
And presence, to me, is the way that we directly know life, the way we directly, through presence, we directly experience the mystery of life, everything. And that's through the heart. That's heart work, to to stay wholehearted, even though sometimes we'll be half-hearted, just because we're human, but to return, always try to return to being wholehearted, which means being thorough. And through presence, I experience the mystery directly. Now, the paradox is, if I life is so much more than my experience. So if I'm only left with my experience, oh, brother, I'm in trouble. Because then what comes as clear and certain and life-giving can in an instant become stubborn and imposing and wrong-headed. So, meaning is the way we share presence. That's when I am present and you're present. Meaning is what flows between us. This is how I can experience more than just my experience. And I have in the One Life We're Given, there's a story that came through me that has been a great teacher for me. And it's about a widower who sees an old sage, a woman sage, uh, to ask about his grief. And he's just, he's saying, what's the use? Why bother? This is, now that my love is gone, now my wife, I can't, nothing matters. And she sits with him by a river, um, and she gives him a stick, and she says, put the stick in the water. And he does. It's a long branch, like a bough from a tree. And she says that you can feel the water through the branch without getting wet. This this is what meaning is like.
mhm,
And then she says, now close your eyes and feel your wife long gone. That you can feel her though she's not here. This is how meaning saves us. So meaning is the stick between us, which is, it's Martin Buber's I Thou.
mhm,
And relationship is the connective tissue of the universe.
mhm.
So we can conceptualize these things, but unless we inhabit them, that's where we learn over and over again.
You know what comes to mind when you say inhabit this and you say presence, and immediately I think stillness, spaciousness, presence, stillness, and spaciousness. When you say meaning, I think humility. How can I learn if I don't have humility? And when you say relationship, real relationship, I think of curiosity or wonder, that those are as a concept, yes, I need to be present, but to recognize, no, I need to find enough stillness so I can
Yeah.
feel the current that you're talking about. And meaning, I need to be humble enough to not know so I can discover that which I don't know. And then the relationship, that kind of like, who are you? Who is it? I think it's in the Tao. It says, um, I don't know who you are, but I'll spend the rest of my days trying to find out.
Yeah.
That kind of wonder.
Well, I mean, one that's beautiful, and I think for anyone who's watching or listening, that my invitation is, well, what's your current inventory or assessment of your own practice of presence, meaning, and relationship? What
Mm,
does that look like for you? What needs more attention? How can you deepen your practice of presence? How can you deepen your practice of meaning and of relationship? What are the next steps in your own journey?
mm. That's beautiful, Mark. I just realized we're getting close to the end of our time here. I I would love to, number one, if tell us what you're up to and what people can participate in. But one area that always is important to me is faith. Maybe you could talk about, you call it functional faith. Maybe you could talk a little bit about faith before we close, and then
Yeah.
share anything you might want to add to that.
So functional faith for me is faith in life itself, regardless of the many things that happen to us. Not faith in a dogma or a person or a tradition. And the easiest way to kind of present this or share it is, um, so imagine, I actually have a small poem that I think I can recite. It's called Mind as Keyhole. And it goes like this. It says, above the cloud, everything is light. Below the cloud, everything is gray. To blame the cloud is to be a victim. To try to conquer the cloud is to be a hero. To see the cloud as a cloud is the beginning of peace.
Hmm.
So both realities are true at the same time. Above the cloud, there is always sunshine. So faith is knowing whatever we're experiencing, uh, that light hasn't gone anywhere. Not to minimize that the cold, damp darkness under the cloud is real too. And so faith is not denying the reality of either, but allowing the heart to be open enough that it makes a difference if we're going through life under the cloud, knowing that the that the light is always there. Another way to think about this, I think this speaks to Leonard Cohen's great song Hallelujah. When he talks about the broken hallelujah, I think he's speaking about this, about holding both sides of reality always in good faith. And and so if, say, I'm on a raft, you and I are on a raft out at sea, and a wave comes along and throws us off the raft, breaks the raft, well, that's not a good day for you and me. It does not diminish the majesty of the sea.
Hmm.
Both are true. So it reminds me. So there was a samurai in the 16th century, Masahide, who, after a long life as a very successful samurai warrior, he put his sword down. He said, he walked away from it, and he went to apprentice as a poet with Basho. Man, I would have loved to talk to that guy, right? Like, what happened? And but his legendary haiku is this: My barn having burned to the ground, I can see the moon more completely. My barn having burned to the ground, I can see the moon more completely. And in those three lines, and we don't know what he intended, but that's not the point. It came through him, like all poetry and literature and art. And for me, both realities are true. There is no skipping over, and which all the work with trauma, there is no skipping over the loss of that barn. And now that the barn has burned, oh my God, there's this vastness I had no idea was there that I'm a part of.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you, Mark. That is lovely. Anything you want to say about your upcoming adventures here?
Yeah, thank you. Well, actually, starting this coming weekend, I'm offering my next webinar, a three-part webinar, which is based on the new book, Surviving Storms, and people can still register there if they're interested. It's three weeks in a row from 1 to 2:30 on the 4th, 11th, and 17th of February.
That's
And
Eastern time.
Eastern Time, 1 to 2:30 Eastern Time, and people can register at live.marknepo.com.
Great, great. Well, I will try to get this out there before it starts.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, yeah. Mark, it's just always such a pleasure and such a gift. I hope we get to 50 books.
Oh, thank you.
Because
Thank
each one
you.
is just a treasure. And congratulations on the 20th anniversary, I think, of
Yes.
yeah, the Book of Awakening. So
Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to our ongoing conversation,
it's
and
true.
all the best with your book, and also with what you're going through now.
Yeah.
You know.
Thank you, Mark. It will be complete within a few weeks. So it's quite a long journey. So thank you. Thank you for your
All
wishes.
right. Well, many blessings, Michael.
Much love to you.
Bye
Bye.
bye.